Politics Home, Tom Scottson, and author and broadcaster Natasha Devon. Great to have you with us this bank holiday. We're going to start with The Times. Ed Miliband, a hugely influential figure in the Labour Party. Is he making moves to help Andy Burnham then, Tom?
It's an incredibly interesting story, and one that his stock has only risen within, I'd say, since Labour won the election. He's been Energy Secretary. I think allies and also even detractors have said that he's probably been one of the most effective cabinet ministers.
Sure.
And he's kind of seen as the head of the soft left now. One of the most interesting lines from the story that I thought was that he looks like he will back Starmer, come what may, whatever the results of the locals, because he believes that waiting for Andy Burnham to come back to Parliament instead of maybe trying to coronate Angela Rayner or side with Wes Streeting is the most effective way to kind of implement his ideas and policy through. So I think this is a figure of anyone in the cabinet that people should look out for.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, the rise and rise of Ed Miliband within Labour. He's saying, essentially, that he doesn't want the top job, but he does have reservations around certain characters within the party, including Angela Rayner, because if there is a reshuffle after the elections, possibly he could be moved into Chancellor. It's a game of chess. Natasha.
I'm inclined to agree with him, though, about the stability. When Keir Starmer came in, he promised us that there would be a different sort of politics and that politics would tread more lightly on all of our lives. If you remember the dying gasps of the Tory rule, how many different leaders we had during that time, it was exhausting. I think the public would prefer, actually, Starmer, unpopular as he is, to remain in post.
Yeah, it's going to run and run, this one. We'll just park that for a moment to a story in The Guardian. And it's all about an influential government advisor, Natasha. His name is Varun Chandra, and he's been having these meetings with tech bosses, hasn't he? Including Google, Amazon, Apple, Meta. And these took place as the government were trying to, you know, finesse their policies in this area.
I mean, most people won't have heard the name Varun Chandra, but he's incredibly influential at government level, and he has had reportedly 16 meetings between October 2024 and October 2025. This is really a story, I think, about the extent to which these tech giants are dictating government policy and hold the fates of nations in their hands. And we know that the government in the UK have been really keen to not be left behind in terms of AI. Great, OK, but we need greater transparency about what they're planning.
Yeah, and the Cabinet Office are saying they refuse to reveal if Chandra had meetings with other companies. It also took 12 months for The Guardian to get this information, and they did a freedom of information request. That's quite interesting. Also, though, Tom, Trump's presidency came up in 2 meetings. This was with the Microsoft Vice Chair, Brad Smith. So this is a, you know, highly regarded aide to Keir Starmer. Obviously, civil servants, you know, they have to declare their meetings, but in this case, it's not the case. You don't have to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting story and clearly long-running investigation, but I think it does show how AI is so important to the current UK government's growth strategy. I feel that they are relying on this to get them out of the mud, come what may, at the next election, because they see this as a real growth industry. And, of course, if we can remember, last year when Trump did come for the state visit, AI was a huge part of the trade deal that, again, now could be on thin ice, and, you know, who knows what's going to happen with that now. But, yeah, it's going to be an incredibly influential kind of story, and I think this is probably not going to be the last of it that we will see.
No, and there is that consultation, isn't there, ongoing around a possible ban for, you know, under 16s and social media use. Really interesting topic. Let's move on to the Eye. We've been talking about this on the show. Keir Starmer, he's in Armenia. European leaders are gathering, and they're talking about, amongst other things, a pot of money promised for Ukraine and the UK potentially giving money to that.
And I think, again, the kind of striking thing that we've been discussing is where is this money necessarily going to come from? I think this is probably the unclear detail, but I think this is probably a bit more clever politics from Starmer. I feel that since he has been elected, and I think his popularity has been waning, he knows with the base, and particularly Labour voters, they are very keen for closer relations with the European Union. Now, the best way to do that is to look at it through defence, because most people in the country think we need greater defence spending. So if he can twin that, saying we need greater defence spending, but also closer ties with our EU partners, I feel that is very intelligent from him, and he can also then offset that with someone like Reform, who went more distant relations with the European Union and also the Conservatives.
Yeah, good move, do you think, Natasha, given the strained relationship with the US?
I mean, absolutely. The polling company More in Common recently did a study where they found that the UK politically is divided into 7 tribes, and there are various ways in which those tribes diverge and converge. But one of the things that most of the population has in common is support for Ukraine. So, as Tom says, this is an absolute winner for Keir Starmer.
OK, we're going to move on to... It's a striking image. It's in the Times newspaper, and their headline is that French police separate migrant mothers and children on the beach. And it's images like this that stay beyond the figures, beyond the headlines. A pregnant woman also, they're reporting, was held back in tears as a boy of 3 left that Dunkirk crossing. Talk to me about this story and why it's important for us to talk about it today.
Well, this is a 3-year-old Eritrean boy who was separated from his pregnant mother at the border by French border police. And I think it's so important that we hear these human interest stories, because most often when we're talking about immigration, for example, on my LBC show, the question that people ask is, why don't they stay in France? France is a safe country. But as soon as you learn about the conditions in the Calais migrant camp and in other border camps in France, the question is answered immediately. I recently heard Zach Polanski speaking at an event about his experiences of going to these camps and seeing the conditions that people are being kept in, and some of the potential human rights abuses that are being committed by these border police.
And Tom, it's a evocative picture, isn't it? Each political party will have their headline, you know, smash the boats or the gangs, but until that is really fundamentally unpicked, this will continue to happen.
Well, for sure, and I think that these kind of images do stay in the public's imagination for a long time. I think one of the most vivid ones I can remember about 10 years ago, it was on the front page of The Independent with a boy on the beach and his father. I do think this does have the capacity to shift the public mood, but I feel that coming up to the spring, immigration is still a massive issue. I think with in June and July, when the weather continues to improve, I feel that it's still going to be an important issue. So while this might shift at the margins, I still think there's a huge appetite to reduce boat crossings, and I think it's one of those issues that does cross party support, really.
Yeah, OK. Let's talk about a story in the Daily Telegraph now. And they're reporting that there's a locked-out generation that's been essentially stuck on benefits, out of work. Almost 1 in 20 in their mid-20s are on benefits.
And it's a huge margin, and also one that's only kind of increasing. You look at young people who talk about lockdown generation, they've probably never been in a work case setting, they've only worked from home, they can't get a job. And I think it's putting it down to a multitude of factors. It's also increasing taxes, increasing regulation, but also it's just incredibly different global economy now. And I think the really stark point about this is, of course, it's terrible for young people now. They're out of work, they can't get a job. But if they've been involved in this environment and they therefore can't have the skills now, it's going to be more difficult in 20, 30 years' time if they're still out of work and dependent on the state.
And we've just spoken about this so much. In the last hour, we were talking about AI. This hour, we're talking about, you know, a government advisor having meetings with tech companies. The jobs that young people maybe stepped into after education, well, they're being soaked up by AI.
And the overall impression that you get is that the social contract is broken, that there are so many challenges that young people face, whether it's record student debt or the competitiveness of the job market. AI now decides whether or not you get an interview. All of that has kind of converged. No wonder we're seeing record numbers that are depending on the welfare state.
OK. Can we end on a story in the Daily Mirror? If you don't know, David Attenborough turns 100 on Thursday, and Springwatch presenters Chris Packham has accused world leaders of incredible stupidity not to listen to the wisdom of Sir David Attenborough's warnings, particularly around the climate crisis.
And Sir David Attenborough made a speech at a climate summit in front of 120 world leaders, saying that they must turn tragedy into triumph and reverse rising carbon levels. And he's absolutely right. We keep being distracted by Trump and Iran and all of the global chaos that's happening at the moment. All of this is ultimately unimportant if there is no planet for us to live on. And there was a story that was missed that came out not last week but the week before, that 2050 really is the point of no return, and we need to act now in order to reduce carbon emissions sufficiently by that date.
And such an important voice for generations, Tom, because if there is change, it will be done by young people.
Oh, for sure, and I think David Attenborough is just a complete figure that cuts across all sorts of generations. But I guess, especially when his programmes, and he's made them for decades, there was many of them even around 10 years ago, but you think about the kind of global uncertainty compared to now. You've obviously got war in the Middle East with Iran, Ukraine, cost of living, and I feel that if it's not even on the top of the agenda for people like Greta Thunberg, for example, who kind of led the charge on this, then it's probably not going to be for most ordinary people.
Yeah, really important. Sir David Attenborough turning 100 on Thursday. That's all from us for now. Join us at the next hour. Thank you.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?